pressure is the EU under to come up with a new system, asylum system?
Well, Tony, good morning to you. Well, the pressure is on. In fact, that pressure is mounting. As we mark World Refugee Day, Europe once again finds itself in crisis mode. And there is one ship that symbolizes that when it comes to this issue of asylum, Europe is as divided as ever. 630 asylum seekers are now safely on Spanish soil. But this boat, the rescue ship Aquarius, has had to navigate not through choppy seas, but polarizing politics. Once the mostly African migrants were picked up in the Mediterranean, both Malta and Italy denied docking rights.
The situation is not ridiculous, it's shameful. As a European, I felt shame.
But Italy's new populist government, which won with tough talk on immigration, disagrees. And in Germany, with the far-right party AfD gaining ground, the pressure is on Chancellor Angela Merkel. If she wants to keep her coalition intact, her own interior minister has given her 2 weeks to find a migration policy that unifies Europe.
If we don't manage to find a common answer to the question of illegal immigration, then the fundamentals of the European Union will be called into question.
The political problems came with the wave of refugees in 2015. That year, more than 1 million, mostly from war-torn Syria, fled to Europe. In 2017, the number of asylum seekers arriving was less than 200,000. But still, a persistent stream of people continue to risk everything for refugee status.
I have come from Turkey, then from Greece to Albania, and tried to go to Montenegro. Police in Montenegro caught me twice.
Those who can stay in Europe will have to navigate an EU where anti-immigrant views are shifting politics to the right. And those on the left are angry and protesting on the streets.
The overall debate has become so toxic that it's almost impossible to have a reasonable, fact-based discussion on the issue of migration.
Well, next week here in Brussels, there will be an EU summit, so all EU leaders will be here, including Chancellor Angela Merkel. Now, when it comes to this summit, at the top of the agenda, it won't be Brexit, it won't be the health of the euro, but rather it will be all about asylum and changing EU asylum laws and procedures. So we'll see at the summit, Tony, if Angela Merkel can come up with some policy that the continent can unite around.
Now, Kevin, what are some of the proposals being put out there to change EU asylum policy?
Well, one proposal that's being put out there by the new Italian Prime Minister Conte, is that the EU should set up asylum centers outside of Europe. So essentially in some African countries where there are a lot of migrants coming from, and these asylum centers can then handle asylum applications, can process them. And the hope is that this would prevent many migrants from making that very dangerous journey across the Mediterranean. The thinking being that if their asylum is either granted, then the EU can fly them into Europe, or if it's denied, then they will not want to make that risk. They won't want to make that dangerous journey. One thing that's already being done is the EU is changing how it's funneling out foreign aid. New programs that the EU is funding across Africa in countries like Niger and Chad are programs aimed to create jobs. The thinking behind this being that if we can boost the economy, if we can create jobs, there won't be much of an incentive for people to want to leave their homes.
Now, the U.S. and the EU are historically very close allies, but many see President Trump as agitating the political climate in Europe right now. How much is Trump a factor in all of this?
Yeah, Tony, this is really interesting because keep in mind, back home in the States, President Trump has his own crisis when it comes to migration now with this very controversial, this very hot-button issue of separating migrant children or illegal immigrant children from their families. Here in Europe, there's been a number of tweets that the U.S. president has sent out that have really angered people. In the past few days, he has tweeted out that crime in Germany is soaring. Well, the data shows that's not the fact. He's also tweeted that we don't want to see what's happening in Europe happen in the U.S. Even though he says he has quite a good relationship with the German chancellor, his tweets point to something else, and it seems that he can really agitate the domestic politics here. What makes this very difficult for EU leaders is they're trying to sift through their own domestic political issues, but at the same time are now dealing with what's a weakening transatlantic bond. And this is a bond that before President Trump, many thought would be unshakable and unstoppable, but we are now starting to see cracks in that EU-US relationship.
All right, thank you so much. Interesting times. It seems that Kevin Ozebek. Kevin, we'll catch up with you a little bit later on. He's reporting live from Brussels.